During this series, I've said that in the beginning of most messages, we're going to have a little piece about creation, science, and the Bible. And so we're going to do that, continue that today. Some of these pieces over the rest of the series, a few of them at least, are going to be just introductions to people. Scientists in particular. And today I'm going to introduce you to one of the big guns, okay? This is Dr. James Tour. All right, now we did have a little tiny clip from him earlier in the series. Has anyone ever heard of this guy? I know there's a couple of you in here. Yeah, there's some people in here who are very into James Tour, actually. All right, now here's the thing about him. He is a professor of chemistry, materials science, and nanoengineering at Rice University. That's in Houston. And he is, let's just say, a very influential scientist. The interesting thing about him, I'm going to show you what kinds of things he's been saying in a few minutes. But the interesting thing about him is he's been saying some things about how we don't know as much as maybe we think we do. About things like how life got started and how it progressed from there. He's a chemist. He is an organic chemist. And this is not an understatement to say that he is one of the top organic chemists in the world. Let me show you what I mean. I didn't know about this until maybe about a month ago. There's something for scientists and scholars called an H-index. Who's heard of this before? Like no one, a couple of people. It measures the product. An H-index, I feel like I got lost there. Okay, it measures the productivity and the influence of a scientist or a scholar, the H-index, okay? Now, here's a quote from just the Wikipedia article about H-indices. It's estimated that after 20 years, a successful scientist would have an H-index of 20. An outstanding scientist would have an H-index of 40. A truly unique individual would have an H-index of 60. You can just Google James Tour H-index, okay? Here's what comes up. $174. The highest one ever is 191, okay? 174. So this guy, what basically happened, I don't know, what other slides do I have on here? Oh, this is some other stuff about how influential he is here. This is his D-index, which is like an H-index, but specifically within his field, material science, chemistry. He has a 163. You can see his national rankings and his world rankings. He's one of the top guys in the world. So when he started saying stuff different than what a lot of scientists had been saying for a long time, it's been very, very hard to silence him. Okay, he's been publishing stuff like this. I'm going to show you a video from him in just a minute, a short video clip. But basically, here's what happened. Some guys made him mad. He was just kind of minding his own business. He's going to tell you the story in a minute. But some guys made him mad. And he went and started looking into the actual science behind origins of life, okay? Most people think that science has made life in a laboratory. That is not true at all. Not at all. Most people think that scientists are at least very close to figuring out how life began. That is not true at all, and that's basically what Tour is saying. We're so far away, we're actually further away from figuring it out than we were in the 1950s. That's what Tour says. And this is his area of specialty, organic chemistry. So he basically, some people made him mad, and he went and looked at their research, and he said, your research is just basically fake. You're lying to people. So check this out. This is just a video. Let's restart it here. You have the sound on for this video. This is a video of him just answering the question, why are you so into this topic? And why are you so vocal and outspoken about it? Ready? Here we go.
Yeah, why am I so motivated to speak up against this? It's because somebody pushed me. So I was going up for an award, and a few of my colleagues said they would never put me up for the award because you have to have other colleagues to nominate you. You can't I nominate myself for this award. You're not allowed to do that. They said, we won't nominate you because you signed a statement back in 2001, which is now called the Dissent from Darwinism Statement. At the time, I didn't even know what. It came to me in an email. It was like in 2000 or 2001. It came to me in an email. You know how fast you go through emails. And I read this statement. It says, can you agree to this? I said, yes. I found my name on a list with 700 other scientists. And the statement goes something like this, that we find that natural selection and random mutation insufficient for accounting for the diversity of life. Therefore, further research is warranted. Never said Darwinian evolution was wrong. It just says we find it insufficient, so further research is warranted. Where in any other place of science would you not say that further research is warranted? That is the kiss of death for a scientist to say that. We get no more money. Further research is always warranted. But because that came to Touchstone, and they said, because you signed that statement, I said, well, if that's the bottom line, that's the end, I was just minding my own business. Not anymore. And so I started looking into this, and I wanted to track back Darwinian evolution to the beginning, which brought me into Origin of Life. And I started looking into Origin of Life, and I thought, this is smoke and mirrors. This is smoke and mirrors, and nobody knows this except me. Because you have to be an organic chemist to really understand this, number one. Number two, you have to be interested enough to go after it. And number three, you have to be willing to take the shots like I heard came on Instagram when people heard that I was going to speak. Look, they've said all that they're going to say, and that just catalyzes me. It lowers the activation energy to get to the other side of this equilibrium. And you know, every time people say, you know, he's nefarious and he's going against current scientific consensus, I'm like, yes, I'm going to go even more.
All right. So that is Dr. James Tour. I just wanted to give you an introduction to him. You know, I would suggest go watch some stuff by him. It's amazing. He's basically saying the science that's out there that says we have any idea how life originated, it's all garbage. That's what he's saying. Not only all garbage, like almost to the point of fabricated or gross overstatement of the case. Amazing. All right. We're going to jump into our message for today. We are in Genesis. Of course, good, the bad, and the faithful. We said this before. And Genesis is, we've now come into the second section of Genesis. Okay, we went up through chapter 11. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are sort of the beginning of the world and how everything came to be the way that it is now. And we had the Tower of Babel last week, which you're going to need to remember because we're going to refer back to that in the message today. And now we're getting in, it was a little bit like the Wild West in some of those times, in some of those chapters, early chapters, but now we're really getting into the Wild West section of Genesis. Because today we're going to start with Abraham. The whole rest of the book of Genesis, which is very long, tracks one family. One family. This is God's plan, okay? We saw last week Nimrod, who was the rebel, this amazing powerful war leader. He builds this city and he conquers all these lands, and this is how he's going to build things and rule the world. And God's plan is totally different. God's plan is he's going to pick one family and he's going to work with them. Are they a super impressive family? No, they're not. In fact, there's almost nothing impressive about this family that he chooses. And he's going to work with them, how? Only for one purpose, to build faith in them. He's going to have them do weird stuff, like just wander around the desert with some sheep and some goats. This is God's plan to save the world, to bring it back to him. And so we're going to see today Abraham go west. I was going to call this message, Go West, Young Man, except Abraham is like 75 when he goes west. So then I thought, Go West, Old Man, but I thought that was kind of offensive. I don't know. Probably shouldn't do it. So 2 parts. So we're in the second part, right? We did our origin. Now we're into a chosen family. Okay? The good, the bad, and the faithful. Before we jump right into the text, let's just have a bird's eye view of what we call the patriarchs, okay? Because that's what the whole rest of the book is about. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph as well, the story will follow. These are 4 generations of this same family. Now, before we actually talk about the patriarchs, I do have to say this. Patriarchs is not the same thing as patriarchy, okay? That's a word that gets thrown around a lot that basically is used to talk about oppression of women. It's not at all what we see in the patriarchs. The patriarchs are leaders of their families and their clans. And you'll actually, interestingly, what you're going to see as we go through this story over a number of weeks is women were actually very powerful in this story. Yes, Abraham is in charge in a certain sense. He's leading his family. But Sarah is massively powerful. In fact, one of Abraham's biggest struggles is sometimes Sarah's trying to get him to do something he shouldn't be doing, and he can't resist her. Interesting. So Abraham and Sarah are the first two, and you're going to see Abraham and Sarah are renamed. So as we go through the text, in the beginning, their names are Abram and Sarai. So don't be confused by that. I will probably use these names interchangeably. Abram and Abraham, Sarai and Sarah. Then, of course, their son is Isaac, right? This is the only son that's from both of them. We'll get to that in the story. And Isaac and his wife Rebekah, we'll get to them later on in Genesis. And then Jacob, of course, has a couple of wives as well as a couple of other women on the side. So this isn't a really great family in some ways. And then Joseph and the whole story of Joseph going down to Egypt. And we're going to see that as we go through this. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the patriarchs. And so your first point today is pay attention to old people. It was good that we just had that the Elim Village thing yesterday. The Women of Hope went to Elim Village and hung out with some older people. Hopefully nobody takes this as offensive. It actually should be, being called old, if you are older, should be a crown of glory for us, even though our culture thinks of that as a negative term. What we see in Genesis is the whole Israelite nation later under Moses. Moses is writing this down. He is trying to help everyone pay attention to the lives of their ancestors, to old people, and what happened throughout their lives, so that they could learn what God is really like and what God is doing with us in our lives. So this is just a little snippet. You should think about, at least some of the time, what's happened to your own immediate ancestors, what's happened in your family. There are patterns in families. There are things God is trying to do in your family. And often we miss these things and we just don't pay attention to them. We're going to see this in Abraham. Abraham's dad is heavily involved in all of this. And then, of course, his children are as well. Pay attention to old people. You will learn a lot about how to live your life right now. The message today, Abraham goes west. And his life, basically, we're going to do 2 weeks on Abraham. So today we're going to talk about his calling and the promise that was given to him. And then next week we're going to talk about his testing and how his faith developed. Because you're going to see all of this stuff that God puts Abraham through. And it's a lot. It's a mess what Abraham has to go through. All of it is designed for one purpose. It's not to make Abraham super famous. It's not to make Abraham impressive. It's not to make Abraham smart. It's not to make Abraham rich. It's to make Abraham a man of real faith. That is the only thing that matters to God. And if it takes your entire life, that's what God wants to get out of your life. Faith. You can write this in your notes. Abraham hears someone calling. This is how it begins. He doesn't know who it is. He knows it's not a human being, but in the beginning, he doesn't know who he's hearing. I'll start off reading for you Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, one of the early Christians, a man named Stephen, gives a summary of a lot of the history of Israel. And he tells us some stuff about Abraham. We'll jump back into Genesis in a minute as well. But here's what Stephen says. Brothers and fathers, listen to me. Let's pay attention to our ancestors for a minute. The God of glory appeared to our forefather Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. Leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land that I will show you. So he left. He left the land of the Chaldeans, and he settled in Haran. After the death of his father, God sent him to this land where you are now living. He gave him no inheritance here, not even enough ground to set his foot on. Abraham never received a land. That was the whole promise. We'll get to that. But he never receives it. God promised him that he and his descendants after him would possess the land, even though at that time, Abraham didn't even have a child. You're going to have all these descendants, no kids. God spoke to him in this way: for 400 years, your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, God said. And afterwards, they will come into a country, out of that country, and worship me in this place. Then he gave Abraham the covenant of circumcision. Abraham became the father of Isaac, circumcised him 8 days after his birth. Later, Isaac became the father of Jacob. Jacob became the father of the 12 patriarchs. He had 12 children, Joseph among them. We saw this before. Does anybody remember what this is? I'll give you a little bit of interaction here. It is a ziggurat. It's a ziggurat, which is an interesting word. It's sort of a step pyramid. They built these in ancient, there's several names for this same place, actually. We could call it ancient Sumeria. We could call it ancient Babylon. Or we could call it Chaldea, the land of the Chaldeans, which is what it's called in Genesis. We just saw that. Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldeans. And this, which is partly reconstructed, this ziggurat, is actually the ziggurat of Ur. It is from Abraham's hometown. It is Abraham's hometown. You remember what it looked like around these things? We had this little video I've shown several times. What was the purpose of these ziggurats? They were a place where you could go and meet with the gods, right? You were higher. We talked about the Tower of Babel was one of these things. You were higher than everybody else, and so you were a little bit closer to the heavens. What's up there? You weren't really close to it at all, were you? God had to come down and look at what was going on. And so you were the intermediary. So this was, we talked about this last week, this was literally the first pyramid scheme. You were closer to the gods. You built a pyramid, so you were up there, and now you could control everybody down here because you're the only one that can talk to the gods. And so Nimrod, the rebel, and all of the people like him, the other rulers of this area, they built cities on this basis, and this is how they controlled people. These were not nice places to live. Almost everyone in these cities was in some form or another a slave. These were not nice places to live unless maybe you were the leader, the king, right? And everybody bowed down to you. So that was the purpose of these things. Crazy. The city of Ur in particular, and this will come back, this will be important in a moment, it was dedicated to every city was dedicated to one of these gods. And the city of Ur in particular was dedicated to the god Sin. Now, it doesn't have any link. It just happens to be the same name as like evil in the Bible, right? Sin. It's not, it's a different language. It's not Hebrew. But it is a remarkable coincidence. It was dedicated to the god Sin. And this is actually an interesting carving that was, if you know your Bible well, this was actually found in the citadel of Susa, which is from another place in the Bible. You can tell me if you know where that place is later. So that means it was taken to the citadel of Susa. It was originally from either Ur or a place around there. And this is a picture. What's being depicted here is a king. Well, actually, this is a god. This is Ishtar, I think. And then Ishtar also represented by this star. And then this is a king presenting his child, I think it's his daughter in this case, on top of a ziggurat to the gods. And this middle god, right here, represented by the moon, that's Sin, the god of Ur, the god that Abraham grew up worshiping. But Abraham heard a call from some other god, not the God that ruled his hometown. Think about how radical this is. Everyone in that town worships the king who is the servant of this great god Sin, and everyone bows down to them. And Abraham hears a call from somewhere else. And it's very clear in the text, he has no idea what God is calling him. Moses does. Moses writes over and over for us in Genesis which God was calling Abraham. Yahweh, the God who created the world. But no one knew that name until it was revealed to Moses hundreds of years later. Abraham hears a call from an unknown God. The first thing that happens in Genesis is Abraham's dad and Abraham's whole family, they leave Ur. They leave the city, which, again, for fairly regular people, I mean, they probably weren't slaves. Well, they clearly weren't slaves. But they were not rulers. And so these are kind of middle class, if there was such a thing as middle class. And for somebody to immigrate to a different city on their own in those days, in that period of history, it is almost unknown. It almost doesn't exist at all. Something like Abraham and his family leaving Ur, it's remarkable they were even allowed to leave. But the first thing that happens in the text in Genesis is that Abraham's dad goes halfway. Let's check it out. The end of Genesis chapter 11, it says this. This is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abram, also Nahor and Haran. So these are Abraham's two brothers. And Haran became the father of Lot. So Lot is Abraham's nephew. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans. So they're still in Ur, and they have a tragedy in the family. They don't understand it. Why would God allow this? In the land of his birth. We don't know exactly how, but it's clear that this tragedy is involved somehow in Abraham's calling. It's repeated over and over again. Haran had died in the land of Ur before they left. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they left. They set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Now, we got to pause for a minute. You might wonder, why does Pastor Isaac spend so much time maybe on some of these names and understanding the background? Why do we need to know what's going on in Ur? You're going to miss the depth. You're going to miss, in some ways, the whole story if you don't understand some of these things. First of all, they leave Ur of the Chaldeans. They leave this ziggurat-dominated king, god of sin-dominated nation. They leave. And their plan is to go to Canaan. Does anybody remember where we saw the word Canaan last in the book of Genesis? Have you been reading through the book of Genesis? A couple of you. Remember Noah? You probably remember him. Everybody remember Noah? Noah built an ark, and he had some animals, right? And then he survived a flood, and then after the flood, he came out of the ark, and he worshiped God, and then everything was perfect, right? No. He worshiped God, and then he planted a vineyard, grew some grapes, made some wine, and got really, really drunk. And his family had this massive crisis moment. And as a result of that crisis moment, his son, Ham, Noah cursed his own son because his son had done something horrific. And in fact, he not only cursed his own son, he cursed his grandson. And his grandson's name was Canaan. His grandson's name was Canaan. Canaan is the name of a cursed land. It's basically the land of Israel today. Certainly the biblical land of Israel, sometimes also called Palestine. It is in between two empires. We'll see that in a minute. Terah lived 205 years. He died in Haran. It is in between two empires, okay? So this is a really simple map so we can see it easily. Here's Ur, okay? And over here, near Ur, between those rivers, okay, Mesopotamia means between the rivers. It's the Greek words for between the rivers. So the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, between those rivers, that whole area is Mesopotamia. It's the Chaldeans. It's Babylon. It's Sumeria. There's Ur. Here's Canaan. What's over here? Egypt. In this time, there are somewhat three. There's also a Hittite or an Assyrian empire up here. But there are big empires, right? Ruled by these warlord emperor kings who believed they were gods or connected to the gods. And in between all those areas is a kind of badlands, a no man's land, a wasteland where there's really no ruler. There's just all these little warlords fighting with each other all the time. And that land is the cursed land of Canaan. And this God calls to Abram and says, leave your big city, leave this big empire, and head out into the middle of nowhere where people are just murdering each other all the time. Go west and see what I'm going to do through you. But what happens right off the bat is Terah, his dad, so we don't know. I've often speculated that maybe his dad heard the call as well. Because it says that Terah took them, right? It doesn't even say Abraham. We know Abraham's already heard the call. We know that from Acts chapter 7. But it says Terah took his son Abram. Terah is the one leading the family out of Ur, not Abraham. So I've often wondered, did Terah hear this call as well from this unknown God? But what happens is, when they get to Haran, they stop. Now, this is important because Haran is in some ways the edge of the world. Haran is actually the only other city in the whole region that's dedicated to the same God as Ur. The god of sin is the ruler in Haran, and it's another big ziggurat city. So what happens is they travel all this distance, and then they're on the brink of going down. You can't go straight across to Canaan. Why not? It's a desert. You'll die. No one went straight across this way. This is important for understanding all of Bible history, right? Everybody always invades Israel from the north or the south, because to the east is a huge desert you can't cross. They get to Haran. They're supposed to go into Canaan, out into the wilds, but they're too afraid to go. So they stay in Haran for another 25 years maybe, something like that. Dad never leaves. But finally, when he gets old enough, and it should be encouraging to us. Abraham is 75 when he finally leaves and obeys God and goes to Canaan. That should be encouraging to us, right? If you feel like you haven't quite made it yet to what you're supposed to be doing in your life, well, there's so many people in the Bible who didn't get there till they were like 75 or 100. So don't worry about it. You got lots of time. Well, you do. You're never going to die if you believe in Jesus. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, Abraham. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless anyone who blesses you, and anyone who curses you, I'm going to be against them. I'm going to curse them. And all the peoples, here's what I'm going to do, Abraham. This is my plan. All the peoples on the entire earth are going to be blessed through you." Do you notice that that has actually come to pass? Must have seemed virtually impossible to Abraham. What? All the people in the whole world? I'm just one guy, and I can't even get my dad to leave town. I have to wait till he dies. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. And Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he finally set out from Haran. I just added a word. You're not supposed to do that, but you can get it. Finally, he sets out from Haran when he's 75 years old. Abraham follows an unknown God into an unknown land. Here's the other thing about Abraham. Abraham has no idea what he's doing. And this is another piece that should be very, very encouraging to us. Let me go back for a minute and just look at this. What exactly? We read this and if you're a Christian, you've heard this a lot of times, and we're not there. It's very hard to feel the impact of what something was like if you're not actually in the situation, if you're just hearing about something from 2,000, 4,000 years ago. Oh, it could be 1,000,000 years ago for all it matters to me, right? What did it feel like to be there? What exactly is God asking Abram to do? Leave, certainly. Go from your country, your people, your father's household, to a land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. This unknown God, Abram doesn't even know this God's name. He has no idol, no physical idol of this God, which is how everyone worshiped. He has nothing, no rock carving to worship that he says, is this God or represents this God. He has no idea who this God is. This God is calling him to go to a place he's never been to before, and everybody says is cursed. And this God is asking him to start a new country. What would you do if God asked you to found a new nation? Leave Canada and go to a place that I will show you and start a country. I think there was a guy maybe about 10 years ago who did this, went to an island that was unclaimed and planted a flag in it and said, this is, whatever. I don't know, his name was Daniel or something, and Daniel Stan or something he called it, I don't know. But no one else ever came, and so then his country just died, right? This is the kind of level of what God is asking Abram to do. Go start an entirely new country. Where? In the worst place in the world. Now, what do I have to work with, God? Just whatever you have. Just leave with your own relatives and your family and just go there. He took Sarai, his wife, and his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, all the people they had acquired in Haran. So they do have some more people with them. Okay? Everyone in the world had slaves at this time. Abram has slaves. They set out for the land of Canaan. They arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. So there's all these people in the land who might just murder him. He has no army. It's just him and his guys. Check this out. We got a picture here. This is a painting from 1850, a depiction of Abram entering the land of Canaan. Now, he had more people than this, right? At one point later in the narrative, it's clear that Abram later in his life is able to call forth about 300 men from his household. So his household is a large church kind of size, okay? But they're not a nation. They're not an army. They've got women and children and a whole bunch of sheep. That's what they are. Abram is a cowboy. Do you guys see this? Not with cows, not with horses. Actually, he didn't have many camels either. He did have a few camels, but camels were not nearly as common in the Middle East then as they are now. So mostly he was walking, and he has a ton of sheep. He's a shepherd. There's so many questions we could ask here. What did Sarah think about this whole plan? It never says, although she clearly has a chip on her shoulder for the rest of her life. She is clearly frustrated, mostly by not having a child, but she's trying to make Abraham do things that she wants him to do. I think almost any woman would be terrified to take this journey. Just trek out into the cursed lands where no one lives. We were talking about this earlier in Bible study. He goes to the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. Why does he go where there's a huge tree? Well, it's shelter, for one thing, but also probably because he knows there's going to be water if there's a tree. He's just wandering around. Look at the way the text reads right here. This is what struck me so much this week. Abraham, he's been called by God. He doesn't know who this God is. He's been waiting for 25 years for something like that for his dad to finally die because his dad won't let them actually leave. He wants to follow this God, this amazing, huge step of faith. He's been called to form a new nation. God says to him, I'm going to do all these crazy things through you. And Abraham says, I'm going to do it. Even if my wife doesn't want, she's coming with me. We're going. He brings all his people there, and then they arrive. They set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived. And then they're there. And nothing happens. God doesn't show up and destroy all the people who are there and build him a city. No, people don't flock to him and say, hey, we're going to join your new country that you're forming, Abraham. Nothing happens. He's just there, and he thinks, okay, well, we need some water, and I hope that tribe over there doesn't come murder us. That's his life. And it goes on like this. Okay, God does appear to him. From time to time, God appears to him in a vision, like this one. The Lord appeared to Abram, and he keeps saying these things to him. To your offspring, I will give this land. So he didn't tell him this until he got to the land. He said, Abraham, I'm going to give you a land. And then Abraham gets there, and God says, actually, I'm going to give it to your kids. You're just going to wander around. But the Lord appears to him and gives him a promise, so he worships the Lord. He went on toward the hills of Bethel. He pitched his tent in Bethel. A lot of the text is just like this. It's just him wandering around. It's not quite the desert, but there's just enough grass to feed the sheep. He just wanders around. He builds another altar, worships the Lord. And then he continues toward the Negev, which is a desert. Okay? We're going to see a lot more coming up. But here's the point, is that God promised him this amazing thing. He takes this huge leap of faith, and then he wanders around for 25 years while nothing much happens. Have you ever felt like your life is like that? Pay attention to your ancestors. Pay attention to old people. Some of the things that happen coming up, this is interesting. This is a fresco that's on a church in Rome, actually. This is a depiction of Abram and Lot separating. He originally went with his nephew Lot, and at one point, we're going to skip over this part in the text, which is why I'm telling you about it now, because we're going to jump forward next week to more toward the end of Abraham's life. But this is a depiction of them separating, him separating from Lot. Lot ends up going back to the big city because Lot can't take it anymore. He can't take this just wandering around. What are we even doing? We don't know when the next tribe or people group is going to show up and murder us, and there's nothing to eat hardly. Why are we here? Lot heads back to town, and Lot ends up being destroyed in the city of Sodom. Well, not destroyed, but his life is destroyed after that. You can go read it. There's one point in which Abram tries to rescue Lot. At one point, he has to fight. He has to gear up his guys, which this depiction makes it look like they're soldiers. They're not soldiers. They're shepherds. He gears up a mini army and goes and fights 5 kings. Actually, maybe he fights the 4 kings. I think he's trying to save the 5 kings. He fights 4 kings, an enemy army, and just trusts that God will somehow deliver him, and God does. Abraham's whole life, if we're going to look at it from a bird's eye view, his whole life is just a faith-building exercise. That's all it is. In Hebrews 11, which we will look at especially when we get closer to Easter, in Hebrews 11, when it lists all these great heroes of faith, Abram is one of these great heroes of faith. Of course, he's the one actually who's talked about the most in that section. And what does it say about him? God made him a promise, and Abraham never received that promise while he was alive. But he lived by faith. He lived by trusting God. And because of that, his impact on the world, God's building things that are invisible. Abram's impact on the world is far greater than any king, president, ruler, emperor, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times greater, his impact on the world. Because he was so amazing? No, he had no idea what he was doing. His impact on the world is great for one reason only. Over the course of his life, through tons of ups and downs, through lots of mistakes, he learned to trust God, even though he can't see God. Next week, we'll come back. We'll take a look at the end of Abraham's life, stuff later in his life, and we'll see what progress he has made. We right here, right now in Community of Hope Church in 2024, God has each one of us on this same journey. Your life is probably not what you think it is. I don't know what you think your life is about, but this is what it really is. It is a faith-building exercise designed for you by God. It's not even designed for what's going to happen in this life. It's designed for things that are going to happen way after this life. God has a plan that's beyond what any of us can imagine right now. Let's pray. We'll continue in worship.